Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Lesson 14 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is chicken thighs roasted in red miso and honey with garlic spinach. This preparation brings together many of the techniques you have already learned and introduces two important new techniques, glazing and sweating. Glazes usually include some type of sugar. They give food a shiny coating and often help them to brown. Sweating is the simple technique of cooking vegetables, in this case garlic, in a little fat on medium to low heat until they sweat away their water content and become tender and translucent. This is also the first dish where we will be making more than one thing: roasted chicken thighs and a bed of spinach on which to plate the chicken. Techniques today are chopping, seasoning, making a glaze, roasting chicken both in the pan and in the oven, sweating, wilting spinach, plating, and adjusting seasoning. So let's start cooking. Okay, this is lesson 14, chicken thighs roasted in red miso and honey with garlic spinach. So let's talk about our mise. First, the ingredients. We are going to need obviously some chicken, and today we are using chicken thighs with the bone in and the skin on. Now, why are we doing that? Well, one, we've already done chicken thighs that were with the bone out, or we took the bone out of them actually, and we cooked them boneless. We're going to roast them today with the bone in because we're going to learn how they roast differently. They take longer. Also, they're less likely to dry out because the bone is a heat sink. The bone helps to keep the meat moist as it's cooking. Also, with the skin on, the skin protects the meat. It also adds extra flavor. So we're going to roast bone in and skin on. We're also going to do it by two different methods, both in the pan and in the oven. We did this once before to see what the different results would be. We're going to do it again today, but we're going to be seeing that it takes longer because it has the bone. Next, we're going to need some olive oil, and that will be mostly for coating the roasting pan. We'll need some red miso. We used the red miso once before. This is a soybean derivative. And we'll also need some honey. I have my honey bear here. We'll need some spinach. Now you can get, this is baby spinach, Whole Foods brand 365, and it's been triple washed. I'm going to wash it again to be safe. These bags are each about 5 ounces. I have two 5-ounce bags here. We're only going to make 4 chicken thighs, so we're probably going to use a little bit more than one bag because when spinach wilts, it almost disappears. It goes from a large volume to a very small volume very quickly. We will also need some garlic. Today we're going to use the Christopher Ranch peeled garlic that comes from Whole Foods. You can also use garlic right off the head. And today also I'm going to chop this before we start. We're in lesson 14 now, so I'm not going to be doing a lot of chopping of the same things that we've chopped before. Okay, so we're going to need a certain amount of garlic. I'm going to chop that before we start. We're also going to need, as we always do, our kosher salt, and we'll need a peppermill for some fresh ground black pepper. We will also need a high smoke point oil, and we've got a bunch of different choices here. We have canola oil. Canola oil has a high smoke point. Smoke point means the point at which the oil begins to smoke, and after that it can actually ignite, catch on fire. So canola oil is one choice. You can also use peanut oil. Some people think that peanut oil imparts a little bit of a flavor to the food. I don't know if I really think it does, but we're not going to use peanut oil. Canola oil is viewed to have a neutral taste. You can also use avocado oil. Avocado oil I just discovered not too long ago. I think it's great. Some people think it has an avocado flavor. I don't really get that. Maybe it's a little bit vegetal, but I think that's fine. I got this at Costco, $10 for this big bottle. And just the other day, I got this big bottle here for $17.99. Best deal around for avocado oil. And again, these 3 oils have a high smoke point. You can get them hot before they'll start to smoke. All right, so that is all of our ingredients for lesson 14. I'm going to break now and come back, and we'll go over the equipment that we need for this lesson. Okay, so we're ready to go over the equipment that we need for this lesson. We'll need a cutting board. We will need a chef's knife. We will need 2 mixing bowls. One of the bowls will be used to toss the chicken in some olive oil, just to coat the chicken in olive oil and to season them. The other bowl will be used to make our glaze with the honey and red miso. Also need to have a wooden spoon for purposes of mixing the glaze. We will also need to have a sizzle plate. That's what we'll use to roast the chicken thighs in the oven. We will also need to have a saute pan. This is the pan that we use to roast the chicken thighs on the stove, and it needs to have a cover because we're going to be doing pan roasting, which is kind of like making a little oven. You may notice actually that this lid does not fit perfectly. It doesn't need to, it just needs to cover the pan. So if you just have a lid that goes onto the pan and makes an enclosure there, that's all you need. In addition to that, we will need to have a colander. Now I have this colander that fits in the sink, so you'll need a colander. You could use one that sits out on the counter or that fits into the sink. It doesn't really matter what kind you use. You need to have a timer. I will probably use my timer on my smartphone. And finally, we will need to have some plates for plating the chicken at the end. And I will show you those when we get to the plating stage. So that's all of the equipment. We're now ready to break, come back, and start cooking lesson 14. Okay, here we are, ready to start lesson 14. I have our prep list here. I've got a couple of things that had asterisks, which means do them well in advance. And the first one on that list is to bring the chicken to room temperature. I brought that out a while ago. Also, to preheat the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. We've already preheated the oven. I've also pre-chopped the garlic. Remember I said I wasn't going to chop garlic for you anymore. You've done it now many times. This is lesson 14, so I pre-chopped the garlic. How much? We'll talk about that in a little bit. And next thing is to mix the glaze. Now the glaze is honey and miso, and we're going to use about equal parts. So again, we're not using measuring instruments, but I'm just going to use a regular spoon here, and we're going to use equal parts of the red miso and the honey. Now, how much do we need? Well, we have, let's bring this over. We have 4 chicken thighs, and we have to have enough to glaze them. Glazing means just basically coating them, okay? So, I think we probably, if we use about 2 of these spoons of miso, and we use about 2 spoons of honey, we should have enough. Okay, so let's get some honey here. Now I think I might do 3. It's better to have too much than not enough. Better to have too much than not enough. Let's use another spoon to get this off of the spoon. So that was 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to add one more spoon of the red meat. So I'm going to rinse off the spoon first, so I don't get honey into the miso. It wouldn't really hurt it, but I like to keep the flavors pretty separate while they're being stored in the fridge. Okay, so that's that 3rd spoon of red miso. Okay, now we're going to mix that together. And I can see this is pretty thick. You can probably see that too. I'm just going to add just a touch of warm water. And by the way, if you need to add just a touch of water, don't put your bowl down way underneath. Put it right up near the spigot, and just put it in there just a tiny bit, and let the water run in. And that way you won't have it splashing all over the place. You get just the amount that you want. And get this to be basically a little bit thinner than the honey. Okay, good. So we've got, it kind of runs off the spoon. See that? It's good. Okay, and that's just enough, I think, to coat those 4 chicken thighs. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to toss the chicken thighs with some olive oil and some salt and pepper. How much? Well, you see that you have 4 thighs there, so we're just going to give it what seems to be enough that would cover all 4 of those thighs. Get some salt in there. And then some pepper from the Peppermill. Remember, I hold this so I don't contaminate the Peppermill, but I'll always wash it later anyway. Get a good coating of pepper. I can show you that. Okay. Now what we're going to do is toss them. Okay, toss them basically to get them coated with the salt and pepper and olive oil. And after you've done this, remember, when you put that pepper in, you really only put it on one side. And now you're mixing it all around. So if you end up with what looks like a nice coating of pepper all over, then that means you've coated it pretty well. The pepper is kind of a guide to whether you have coated it well. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is put that chicken into the glaze. That aside, and we're going to toss the chicken in the glaze. And again, we just need to get it coated. There, we have nice coating all over these pieces of chicken, but also not too much. If we had too much, we'd have to kind of shake off the excess, but this is just a perfect coating. So it turns out that about 3 spoons, 3 parts, I should say, where the part was basically a common tablespoon, 3 spoons of red miso and 3 spoons of honey mixed together with just a touch of warm water. That was gave us a perfect coating. All right, now we'll just put these back on the sizzle plate just to move them around. And get rid of this bowl. Wash my hands. Okay, now let's check our prep list. Next thing on the prep list is to oil the sizzle plate. Why are we doing this? We're oiling the sizzle plate to make it easier to clean later. Again, you could line it with foil if you want. I don't do that. I think it's kind of wasteful. I'm trying to reduce my carbon footprint in ways that I can. So I just oil this, clean it later. Okay? All right. Now, let's check our prep list. We have mixed the glaze, the honey and the miso. We have oiled the sizzle plate. We've tossed the chicken in the olive oil, salt, and pepper. We've tossed the chicken in the glaze. Now we're going to heat some oil in the saute pan. Remember, we're going to be pan roasting and oven roasting. So I'm going to put some oil. We're going to use avocado oil. And how much? Well, I'm going to put 2 chicken thighs in this saute pan and 2 chicken thighs in the oven. So I'm going to put in here probably about, that's probably about 2 tablespoons, roughly. I'm going to be able to coat the bottom of the pan. Now, once this starts to heat up, I'm going to heat it to medium, I'd say medium-high start. Once that oil starts to heat up, it loosens up, it thins out, and it spreads more on the pan. So you don't need as much as you might think you do, because once it starts to get hot, it will spread out. But we can always add more oil later if we need it. So we have heated the oil in the saute pan. The next thing we need to do is move to the stove to start cooking. So I'm going to break, and I'm going to set up at the stove, and we'll be back to start cooking the chicken. Okay, so here we are at the stove, and the pan is getting hot. The oil is getting hot. How can you tell? Well, you can look for just starting to get whiffs of smoke. You can also look at the oil. If it's shimmering, it's ready. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start cooking these at the same time on the stove and in the oven. And we're going to start on the stove with skin side down. And we're also going to start in the oven skin side down. I've got the other two on this sizzle plate, and they're just going to go right into the 400-degree oven. All right, so we're going to, these should take about 35 to 45 minutes to be done. And done means 165 degrees internal temperature, which you can try to register or try to measure with a instant read thermometer like this. But you know, I don't know if these are ever really very accurate. So you also look for whether the juices are coming out of the chicken clear after it's been resting for a little bit. But you'll also get a feel for it. You'll also get a feel for whether it's done. So what we're going to do first is we're going to roast these skin side down and get some nice browning on them. If your stove isn't really perfectly level, or if your pan isn't perfectly flat, you may need to move it around a little bit so you don't get any areas that don't really have any oil. You can always compensate for that by using more oil. So we're going to wait till these get a nice brown. We're going to do it in real time so we see how long it takes. Ooh, that's starting to look really nice. Part of that color is being provided by the roasting miso, and partly by the sugar in the honey. Miso itself is kind of bitter. It doesn't really have a lot of sweetness, but the honey does. But honey itself also is a little bit it's like on the bitter side of sweet. My temperature here is about medium-high. We'll probably reduce that temperature a little bit later. Okay, so that's looking really good. We're going to turn that over. We're going to let those cook for a bit. Now, the same thing is going on in the oven, but I don't expect that we're going to have brown on the bottom of those, on the skin side of those chicken thighs for probably about 10 minutes time. So what we're going to do now is break. We're going to keep track of the time. We're going to come back in 10 minutes. So I think we're going to need about 35 to 45 minutes total to get these done. All right, so actually it's only about 3 minutes later, but I wanted to come back and show you how the bottoms of these are looking. They're looking really nice. And so what we're going to do now is reduce the heat. We're going to reduce the heat down to about between medium and low. And I'm going to cover the pan. Okay, now let's check the ones that are in the oven. See how they're doing. And you can see in the same amount of time, we don't really have anything going on the bottom of these. All right, so they're going to need more time in the oven. So we're going to come back. Let's say we're going to come back in 20 minutes and check on everything. And at that point we will be 25 minutes into the cooking. Okay, so we're back to check on the chicken. So let's see how these guys are doing. They're looking beautiful. And the meat underneath the skin is looking beautiful. Let's try seeing what we get with this instant read thermometer. You want to put it in there and not get the bone, okay? And this is saying, well, this is saying 160 degrees, so we're getting close to being finished with these. All right, so let's get our heat down to low. And I think since they're cooking very well, they're coming along really well, and maybe a little bit too fast, we're going to leave the lid off, okay? They've roasted really well inside that pan. And by leaving the lid off, we're going to actually reduce the cooking temperature a little bit. Now, let's take a look at the thighs that are in the oven. Totally different look here. Not nearly as caramelized. We're at 400 degrees in that oven. Now, I can see that the meat is cooking nicely, but they're not going to have nearly the caramelization that we're getting by the pan roasting. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep roasting these skin side down so we get a bit more caramelization on there. And as I've said before, we're going to let them go for about 10 more minutes and then check them again. As I've said before, Oven roasting depends a lot on whether your oven temperature really is the temperature that you set it at. Unless you have a good, very good external thermometer that can register the heat, it's hard to be sure. The types of oven thermometers you buy in the store that you put in the oven and leave there, I don't think they're very accurate. It's best to have an external thermometer that has a probe that you can put inside the oven and check the temperature. And also in the pan, it depends on how big the pan is. It depends on how crowded the pan is. It depends on what heat you've set the stove on. So, you have to be flexible, as we've been teaching in this course all along. So we're going to let these go for about, let's see how much time I had on my timer when I set them originally for 35 minutes. We have 6.5 minutes left. So we're going to come back when the timer goes off and check them again. Okay, so our timer just went off. It's been a total of 35 minutes, and these two thighs that are in the pan look like they are done to me. If you pull back the meat a little bit, you can see inside that the meat looks done. I don't see any redness. We're going to put them on a sizzle plate, let them rest in a warm place, and they should have clear juices that run out. So now I've talked before about keeping warm. You can put it on top of a pot of hot water. You can put it in the oven if you have another oven that you can keep at about 150 degrees. So I'm going to put those in the oven, warming oven that is, to keep them warm. Turn off this burner. Now we're going to check the thighs that are roasting in the oven. And they are looking very nice. Not nearly the dark caramelization that we had on the other two thighs, but they are looking really beautiful, kind of a honey colored. And let's check internal temperature on those. Remember, you don't want to touch the bone when you're checking the internal temperature because it'll read hotter than they are. And so these are showing about 160 degrees as well. We'll let them go for about 5 more minutes, skin side down. Back in the oven. Back in 5 minutes and check them. Okay, our timer just went off, and we're going to check these thighs. Oh, they're looking very nice. It was only 5 minutes longer than when we checked them the last time, but they're looking very nice. Again, if we pull the chicken away from the bone a little bit, we can see it's cooked. There's nothing pink in there. Very moist. And we could use the instant read thermometer, but I just don't really trust them that much. And so, how about on the top side? Okay, nice caramelization. Not the dark caramelization that we have from the pan roasting, but still very nice. So what we're going to do now is put these in the warming oven as well, and then we're going to break, and we're going to do the spinach. All right, so back in the warming oven. So we have roasted the chicken thighs, and the oven took about 40 minutes. The stove took about 35 minutes. Now we're going to wash and drain the spinach. Now, I showed you earlier 2 5-ounce bags of baby spinach, and I have about 7 ounces here. Once this is in the pan and it starts to wilt, it will substantially reduce in volume. Now, these were already triple washed, but I'm washing them for 2 reasons. One is I like to wash everything, even if it's been washed by the producer, especially when you hear about some of the bacteria outbreaks from time to time. Also, I want it to be damp or slightly wet. Now, I don't want to put this into a salad spinner because I don't want to get it real dry. I want it to be damp. So what we're going to do now is squeeze some water out of it. Squeeze a pretty good amount of the water out of it. You don't have to worry about making the leaves look crinkly or bent, because once they're in the pan and they start to wilt, they're not going to look like this anymore anyway. We're going to try to have them not wilt completely, so we maintain some of this bright green color. Okay. All right, so now we have wilted spinach. I'm sorry, we've washed and we've drained the spinach. Now what we're going to do is cut back to the stove, and we're going to sweat the garlic and we're going to wilt this spinach. Okay, so we're back at the stove. We are going to start by sweating the garlic. Now, as I said in the introduction, sweating means to use a little bit of oil. Put your vegetables into the oil when it is cold, and then heat up the oil and the vegetables at the same time. Now, right now the vegetable is only this garlic. We're going to get into later lessons with what we call a mirepoix. A mirepoix is usually carrots, celery, and onions, and sometimes garlic. And that's a French term. In New Orleans cooking, it's called the Holy Trinity, and it's onions, celery, and green peppers. And in Italian cooking, it's a sofrito, which is onions and celery and carrots and garlic. So again, you're using medium to low heat, and you're basically sweating them. Sweating them means getting the moisture content out of them. You're getting the water out of the garlic, or if it were other mirepoix, out of the carrots or the celery or the onions. There's a whole lot more water in those vegetables. There's not as much in garlic, so it can burn pretty quickly. So you want to use, when you're sweating garlic, you want to use a medium low to low temperature. And how much oil did I use? I probably used about a tablespoon. But that also depends on the size of your pan, and also how much garlic you have. Now, I'm a big believer in not having too much garlic. We're using probably about 2 teaspoons in this preparation. We're only making 4 chicken thighs and the spinach to go with them. In the description that comes with the video, it's actually telling you to use more garlic because you're using more chicken and more spinach. All right, so these we want them to get translucent. Okay, we're not really going for golden. All right, so we're getting translucent now. You can tell because the moisture stops evaporating. It comes out, and so when it stops coming out, that S word again, and so the camera went off. When the steam stops coming off your vegetables, that means they have finished sweating. They've sweated out all of their moisture. So we're going to get all of this spinach into this pan, and we're going to give it some salt, nice generous amount of salt, and several twists of pepper. Now right now that garlic is still in the bottom, but as soon as I get this pepper on here, I'm going to take the tongs. Now you could do this with a fork or with a big spoon or something like that. We're going to toss with the tongs. We're mixing the garlic that's down on the bottom in with this spinach. Now, the longer you cook the spinach, the more it's going to wilt and the more it's going to kind of disappear in the pan. I like to have it so that it still has some of its bright green color. Get a little bit more heat. I was on low for that garlic. Now I'm on about medium. Maybe a little bit below medium. All right, so that garlic is now mixed in well with the spinach. It's wilted nicely. You can see though that it's starting to disappear in the pan. The more you cook it, the more it disappears. And now we can start to see that the water that was in the spinach is starting to boil in the pan. I'm going to turn off the stove now so that we halt the cooking. Take it off the burner so it doesn't get any hotter. And now we're going to check our prep list. We have washed and drained the spinach. We have sweated the garlic. We've seasoned and wilted the spinach. So now it's time to plate. So I'll meet you back at the board for plating. Okay, we're ready to plate. I've chosen these nice simple white plates for this preparation. So what we're going to do is take some of this spinach. I'm going to use tongs, or you could use a slotted spoon so that we don't get too much of the pan liquid, which is mostly water. We don't want to get too much of that onto the plates. We don't want it to look runny. And we're going to try to divide this equally among these 4 plates. Try to keep it all very neat and clean. Someone's phone is ringing. Okay, let's redivide this spinach just a little bit. You can see we have a little bit more on this plate than we have on the others. I'm going to try to get that pretty much evenly divided, okay? Then we're going to take our chicken thighs, put them on top. So if we pull back the skin here just a little bit, fold it back over, okay? And then we're going to take the pan juices, pour them over the top of all 4. Okay. Finally, we're going to do a twist of pepper on each one. Now this isn't so much this is a type of adjusting seasoning, but this is more in the nature of decoration. And just a little bit of salt to finish on the top. Let's check our prep list. We have plated up, we've adjusted the seasoning, and we have finished lesson number 14. So the techniques we used today were chopping, seasoning, making a glaze, roasting chicken both in a pan and in the oven, sweating garlic, wilting spinach, plating, and adjusting seasoning. Please check my Instagram posts, that's Chef's Apprentice Cook Like a Pro, to see the finished photos of the finished dishes. And next up, lesson 15. I'm really excited about this because we're starting to move into some professional, some pro-type ingredients. We're going to be using foie gras in lesson 15. The lesson is Armagnac steamed clams with apples and foie gras. And so that's the conclusion of lesson 14. Please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the meal.